your fix for Social Security?
Question was, what's the fix for Social Security? When I announced my campaign, I said we're going to just have to tell people the truth. And it's like the Jack Nicholson election and A Few Good Men. Remember he's sitting on the witness stand? Said, you can't handle the truth? Well, I think you can. And the truth is, anybody who's for doing nothing with Social Security is for cutting it. Because under current law, Social Security gets cut automatically when the program hits a point of financial insolvency or difficulty. So we got to fix it. What I've said is this: anybody who's on the program won't be affected. If you're on the Social Security now, no change. We made a promise to you, we'll keep it. You planned your retirement on it, we'll keep it. Anybody who's coming up on retirement age, we'll keep it just like it is for you. But for the next generation coming up, like my daughter Anna, who's 18, and when she's in the crowd, I like to use her as the example. I say, Anna, your retirement age is going up. So I gotta just look you in the eye and tell you the truth. The program is going broke. It can't be financially solvent on the pathway it's on. So we're gonna have to raise the retirement age for the folks coming into the workforce. We're gonna give them a couple decades notice so they can plan accordingly. But with life expectancies having gone up like they have, we're gonna have to raise the retirement age gradually over time. That's number one. Number two, I don't like means testing because it breeds class warfare thinking. But amongst the bad choices we have, this is one of the least bad choices we have to save Social Security. We're going to say in the future, if you're really wealthy, you're not going to get your cost of living adjustment. I'm sorry. But the program and the country are sinking and drowning, and we got to do some tough things. So middle income and low income people will get their cost of living adjustment. Wealthy people won't. And then in the future, as new people come into the program, we have to give them the option of individual accounts if they want to do that with consumer protection. Or staying in the traditional program if that's what they want to do. It would be voluntary. And there's similar solutions for Medicare and Medicaid, but we have to look each other in the eye and quit pretending this thing is going to go away on its own. We got some tough choices ahead of us. They are not popular, but they have to be done. And if we're not going to say it and we're not going to do it, then I'm wasting your time, you're wasting your time. We might as well just get to solving this thing. And there's other truths I told around the country, including here in Iowa. I got people skipping the race in Iowa partially because they don't support ethanol subsidies. I came here and said on the first day of my campaign, we got to phase out ethanol subsidies. You know, it's not a popular thing in Iowa, but we got to do it. And I'm here. I'm not saying I can't compete in Iowa because I'm calling for ethanol subsidies. I wasn't just picking on ethanol. We're going to have to look at all or most of the subsidies in the whole program, not just ethanol. Yeah.
Hey?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, not picking on you or anybody else, but you know, everybody starts on the entitlement, and I know that you signed off with Strong America, just using that as an entity. Why don't we talk about identifying the waste and get rid of the waste first before we even start with that? Because if you go by their figures, there's a minimum of 25% waste on each government program, and that's a minimum. So if you start talking 25, 40, 50% of waste and duplicity, why do we need to start with the entitlements first?
Here's why. If you look at where the money goes, federal outlays of money as a circular pie chart, and you add up Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the national debt, and a few other entitlement programs, it's currently over the halfway line, and within 15 years it'll be over the three-quarters line, and most of the rest is defense. All the other stuff, the parks, the prisons, schools, EPA, Department of Commerce, foreign aid, is a relatively small slice in that chart in the not-too-distant future. So absolutely, can we cut out waste, fraud, and abuse and streamline and use Six Sigma and do all the stuff that Strong America now is proposing? Absolutely. And again, like all this other stuff, I actually did it. I brought that into Minnesota government. It works. But that is not the total solution. And if you look at that pie chart, almost all the money within 15 years is in the red part or defense. And again, both are true. You cannot solve this thing unless you're willing to reform entitlements. Yes?
Governor, I really appreciate your candor on some of this Social Security issues. Let me ask you, there's an allegation about you that in Minnesota you have like a $5 million budget deficit or something. Would you address what was the specific charges they're making and what's your response?
Question related to the deficit in Minnesota. When I first of all became governor in 2002, I had a historic budget deficit. I balanced the budget every time. In Minnesota, the Constitution requires a balanced budget. It was balanced every time, all the time. And when I left office, the budget that I last left ended June 30th of this year. So it went 6 months beyond after I left. It ended on midnight on June 30th of this year. and it ended with a surplus. Now, when they talk about the deficit in Minnesota beyond that, it's for the 2 years that start now and go into the next 2 years. That $5 billion deficit was premised on a projected 24% increase in spending that I would have never have allowed as governor. That's crazy. It's reckless, it's irresponsible, and I would never have allowed that had I continued on as governor. Like I said, I took spending in Minnesota from historic highs to historic lows, including for 40 years before I became governor. The average 2-year increase in Minnesota spending was 21%. I got it down to about 1%, a little over 1% a year, and in my final 2 years, cut it in real terms. And so they want to say, let's get back to the good old days of getting back up to those 20+% increases in spending. Nonsense. Yes?
Having lived in Minnesota at one time, I kind of understand that it's nicknamed the welfare state. Can you tell me what you enacted as governor to help cut down the welfare abuse?
Sure. There's a number of things that we did that I think are really important. But first of all, we did welfare reform. And Minnesota had a lot of programs. One of the things we used to do, we had a 5-year limit on welfare. And towards the end of the 5 years, people would scramble to figure out what their next steps were. We brought that accountability to the front end of the program and tightened up eligibility in a number of programs within welfare reform. We also cracked down on illegal immigration. We also took on the teacher unions and the public employee unions and got their Cadillac level of benefits and pay more in line with what was going on in the private sector, including one of the longest transit strikes in the history of the country. Our bus drivers wanted to work 15 years, retire, and then be eligible for health care for the rest of their life on the public dime. They had a multi-$100 million unfunded liability just on that one benefit alone. And I said, we're not doing that anymore. And they said, Governor, we're going to go on strike, shut the whole thing down. I said, go ahead. And 44 days later, shut down the whole transit system for 44 days. We got that benefit shut off. And before Wisconsin and all the hoopla that you see, we had all the demonstrations, not as big, but people standing outside my window with signs saying Pawlenty is a weapon of mass transit destruction. And I, vetoed billions, $7, $8, $9 billion in tax increases, took more money in spending out of the budgets overall in social services and welfare than, like I said, all the other governors combined in my 8 years. And the spending curve on all these programs have been hard. Sir, way in the back.
If gravitas was so important in 2000 and they kept hammering our candidate then, they being the Democrat-owned press and the Democrats themselves, why wasn't gravitas a factor in 2008?
Well,
I mean, he had nothing. I mean, you were talking about it earlier, but why? I mean, what in our system?
Well, sometimes the system corrects for the mistake or the perceived concern that exists, and so Barack Obama was successful in giving really good speeches, and unfortunately, the Democrats and some others bought it. But the notion that you're going to put somebody in the Oval Office and make him or her President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief and leader of the free world, when the person had never run anything before in their life, is really irresponsible, I think, and just not wise judgment. So it happened. I think a big part of the country was caught up in the novelty of his rhetoric. It was soaring rhetoric. It was entertaining rhetoric. People, sorry, these reporters' heads are in the way. I'm trying to see back there, sir.
Well, I don't know how we could have made such a mistake as to put.
But I mean, but the bottom line from my standpoint is, if you listen to what he said, many people just thought it was incredibly interesting and entertaining rhetoric. And the lesson we learned, I think, is don't put somebody in there who hasn't run something before, and don't have it based just on rhetoric. You better have somebody in there who's actually accomplished something and done something and driven it to results. And I think the country now, especially today, is about had it with the baloney. I call them a manure spreader in a windstorm. I mean, that's what we got. He just throws stuff all around. There isn't any particular priority to it. A manure spreader under the right circumstances can be a helpful thing, but it's not working. And it was mostly, I think, a big show. It wasn't based on substance. It wasn't based on rhetoric. I mean, it wasn't based on experience. It wasn't based on results. It was basically a big political version of a show, and unfortunately the country bought it. Yeah. Oh, you're Alex. Is that Alex?
Yeah.
You're on my staff. You can't answer. Is that the one where you asked me the 3 reasons?
The easy one.
Is that one more?
One more.
Yeah, somebody else got one other go. Yeah, go ahead.
My name's Dave Nelson, and maybe this is more for the crowd than for the governor, but I'm a Des Moines native and moved back to town last year, but not before I spent the last 25 years in Minnesota. I was in both Mankato and in Rochester, and really admired the way that you ran our state and what you did for the state of Minnesota and how you really did reduce the size of government, and I really appreciate what you did and certainly support what you're doing now. So my answer is
He's not on my staff, and I didn't Yeah, and as some of you know Minnesota, my goodness, it's the land of McCarthy and Mondale and Humphrey and Wellstone and Ventura, and now, United States Senator Al Franken. If I can do it there, I can do it.
What's your plan to get the illegal alien problem under control? Not only the influx, but all the money they receive for what they didn't earn.
It's a great question. Again, on all these things, I've done it. I've done it. So you don't have to wonder about my views on it. I've done it. So when President Bush asked which governors will send the military to the border to reinforce the border because they needed help in terms of reinforcing the border militarily, I was one of the first governors in the country to dispatch the Minnesota National Guard to Operation Jumpstart to reinforce the border. So number one, it's a matter of immigration and security. Let's get the border enforced. That means more drones, more infrared, more barriers, more personnel, and if need be, appropriate deployment of the military. Because we can't have a secure and safe country unless our borders have integrity. Number two, if you want to stop illegal immigration, we got to shut off the magnets for why they're coming, for them. What are they? One is employment, the other is public benefits. And the reason that people are able to access them even though they're here illegally is because the verification systems in place are awful. If I want a job, sir, what's your name? Mike. So if I want a job for Mike and he runs the local hardware store, I come to Mike and say, Mike, I'd like a job. He pulls out an I-9 form. I pull out some documents, Honduran passport, Guatemalan birth certificate. Mike checks the box that I gave him some documents. He photocopies them, throws them in the file. He seemingly has met his legal obligation. I seemingly have met mine. What's wrong with the system? It's a 1950s paper-based, fraud-filled system. We can't ask Mike to go conduct an international investigation in Honduras and Guatemala as to whether those documents are authentic or not. He'd go out of business. So we need a simple, accurate, quick, efficient, affordable way to check. And that's why when I was in Minnesota, I said if you want to have a job with the state, do business with the state, be a contractor with the state, be a subcontractor with the state, you got to use E-Verify. The legislature wouldn't pass it, so I issued an executive order making them do it anyhow. Now, same on public benefits. Most states have laws that say if you're here illegally, you're not supposed to access public benefits unless you're a pregnant woman. But guess what? Nobody checks. We need verification systems, and if you succeed in shutting off the magnetic effect of those two things for people who are here illegally, you'll solve most of the problem in a big hurry. And I actually did. A couple other quick things. A lot of people who come here illegally are here legally to begin with, and they overstay. So I asked my legislature to put visa expiration dates on driver's licenses. So you couldn't drive, or if you did drive, you could see pretty quickly whether somebody overstayed, and if they need to renew, they couldn't get it renewed if they overstayed. Legislature refused to do it, so I issued an executive order telling them to do it anyhow. They did. And then lastly, let's also celebrate the good part. Let's celebrate and embrace legal immigration. Unless you're Native American, everybody in this room is either an immigrant or a descendant of an immigrant. Legal immigration, if done correctly, obviously benefits our country. It brings dynamic qualities and talent to our country. But it needs to be legal and reasonable and orderly. That's not the system we have now. As President, I'll make it so. Sir.
How would you deal with the imminent reality of a nuclear armed Iran?
The question related to how do you deal with the imminent reality of a nuclear armed Iran. If you're interested more broadly, I gave, I think, the most specific foreign policy speech of any candidate in the race. It was at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York a few weeks ago. It's all on our website at timpawlenty.com. But as to Iran, I don't think President Obama has done a very good job on this issue. His effort was around the concept of engagement, and engagement really meant talking to people who want to do us great harm. It hasn't worked. I think we should take every plausible step that we can, and I emphasize the word plausible, to delay, defeat, discourage, and deny Iran the ability to get a nuclear weapon or nuclear capability. I think if they get it, it will present an imminent and existential threat to Israel, to the security interests of our country, and we need to do everything we plausibly can to stop it. Sir.
Will you support the Constitution of the United States as it was intended?
Yes. And you know, the measure of that is in a number of ways, starting with we need to have judicial appointments that respect the Constitution and the laws as written and as intended, not substituting in their personal or political views. And again, this is another example. I've got a record. I've done this stuff. The judicial appointments I made to the Minnesota Supreme Court have been characterized as the best judicial appointments, or some of the best judicial appointments from a strict constructionist standpoint of any state court in the country. I know I am getting off. We'll do the last one. Go ahead.
Recently, our governor had a symposium on education in our state because it's decreasing in its effectiveness. I think it's across the country that that's happening. And I qualified my statement with the fact that I'm a home educating mother of 6, so I'm not at the table in the public schools, and I have backed out. So I qualified to tell you I'm not contributing, I'm not helping, I just opted out. But I'm just wondering, what would you do as from the federal level? Because I hear from the teachers, my cousin is a teacher, he's just like, we can't keep up, we can't do everything they're telling us to do, we wish they would just get out of our business and let us teach. What would you do as the president with all the federal mandates and everything coming at the schools?
Question related to education broadly, but particularly the federal role in it. Look, I'm a product of the public schools, but I lived the American dream in part because I had access to good education. But our education system now needs major improvement and a major overhaul. The number one determining factor how a child's going to do in school is their parents.
Right.
And so the more parental engagement, involvement that we can encourage, the better. And so whether that's what you do every day heroically or otherwise, we want engaged, responsible parenting. It makes a huge difference. So everybody should start with that. Number two, we want effective teachers. And let's face it, we love teachers. They work hard. They've got difficult circumstances. But the teacher unions, in my view, stand in the way of some of the most important and meaningful reforms in the country. So what we need to do with teachers includes, before somebody can become a teacher and get into the College of Education, we want minimum requirements before they get in. These are not federal issues, they're state or local issues. When they're in the College of Education, we actually want them to learn something besides teaching methodology. We'd like them to master the topics they're actually going to be teaching in. Before we let them out, they should demonstrate that they actually learned it. When they're teaching, we need to make sure that we're able to hold them accountable for results. And if they're not effective, we need to be able to either improve them through more training and development, or if need be, fire them efficiently and quickly. If you're a person in the elementary, a student in elementary school grades, and you're unfortunate enough to have 2 ineffective teachers in a row, the likelihood of you ever catching up is small. So this is a critically important issue. But lastly, and most importantly, I think one of the most important education reforms we can have for the country is to break up the top-down government-run, one-size-fits-all government monopoly of education. We don't live in a world anymore of the 1950s where we have one-size government systems for anything. We live in the world of the iPad, metaphorically. That means people get to choose what they want, where they want, when they want, how they want it, from the source that they want, at the time that they want. It's freedom. And this idea that the government's going to tell you you have one option in anything, whether it's education or healthcare, and you sit down and shut up if you don't like it, is ridiculous. That's when we got to stand and fight. So now I'd say, look, ma'am, if you want to have homeschooling, that's fabulous. It's a tremendous success. It takes a ton of work by parents, but the results are awesome, and we celebrate that. You should have that choice. If this couple here would like to keep their kids in the government school, that should be their choice. If you'd like to go, sir, you want to send your kids to a nearby government school through open enrollment, you should be able to do that. Mike, if you want to send your kids to private schools, you should be able to do that. Sir, if you want to go to a charter school, you should be able to do that. And sir, if you want to send your child to do an online learning component that's part of what I've described, you should be able to do that. We should give the parents the money and the resources and the options to do what's best for them and their family as they see fit. Not be told by the government, here's your one government monopoly option, and like it or lump it. And if anybody hasn't seen Waiting for Superman, please see it. It's mostly about charter schools. There need to be more options than just that. Charter schools are great, but that's not the only option. But the movie concludes with this little Hispanic girl, Daisy, who is trying her best to do what she can to advance her education, her and her mom. And Daisy's ability to escape her bad school depends on whether a lottery ball rolls out of a chute at the end of the year with her number on it, so she can get one of the few slots in a charter school so she can escape her bad school the next year. And her number doesn't come up, and she's crushed. In the United States of America, your ability to get a good education shouldn't depend on whether your number rolls out of a chute with a lottery ball or what zip code you happen to be born into. We should have freedom. The resources for education should come to you and give you that freedom. So I'm for school choice and school options wide open. Wide open. And I'll close with this. I grew up in a meatpacking town. My mom died when I was young. My dad was a truck driver for much of his life. He got promoted later to terminal dispatcher. We thought we'd hit the jackpot. But look, my brothers and sisters weren't able to go to college and graduate, not because they didn't have the capacity, they just didn't have the opportunity. When my mom was dying of ovarian cancer, she was laying in her hospital bed, and not long before she died, she called my brothers and sisters to her bedside and made them promise that they would do everything they could to get at least one of her kids through school. And they promised, and they did all they could. And so when you're young and your mom dies and your dad's unemployed for a while, you get to see life up real close. So for me, the American dream isn't a spreadsheet or words or a bunch of numbers. I lived it. And I learned the value of leaning into my faith, my family, hard work. Got a job at the grocery store, worked there for 7 years, but also education. I wouldn't be standing here today unless I had some doors open through a good education. But what we're doing now isn't working for too many kids. All right, that's it. I'm going to wrap.
You're humble. Your mother specified you. She wanted your brothers. She saw the potential in you, and she was right.
Let me close on a positive note. Again, we can do this. The way forward may not be easy, but it's not complex. We know what works for this country. We just take the chapters of success we've had and harvest it and bring it forward to the challenges of our time. But this is the time for all of us to put our shoulders back and roll up our sleeves and get it done. So we need you. And if good people do nothing, then the goofballs take over. And
You've got to give them hell Thursday.
Yeah.
You've got to be up there and give them hell.
We will, but Ames on Saturday is where you can really give some additional help to our campaign. Voting's from 10 to 4. You can provide transportation. There's barbecue, ice cream, bands, the whole deal. You know the drill. But it's going to be an important benchmark for all the campaigns. So if you can come and support my campaign, I'd really appreciate it. It would make a big difference to our effort. And I'd be very grateful. And I will not let you down as our candidate or as President of the United States. Thanks for coming out.